Is everybody ready to begin? Okay. Is anybody interested in learning about how to get more value out of LinkedIn from search? Yes. Is it the whole full belly syndrome? You guys just ate? Okay, so the first thing I'll say is that there should be some time at the end for questions. There's 2 mics in the aisles, so don't be shy if you have questions. And also, if there's something that's burning that you want to mention in the middle, you can interrupt me. Just gesticulate wildly, and I'll call on you. And I'll repeat the question for other folks. So I am Glenn Cathy. I work for Kforce. It's a US-based staffing firm, about $1.2 billion in revenue. I also oversee the Senior Vice President of Talent Acquisition there. And we have a national recruiting center with about 300 recruiters in it. And I also manage some very specialized recruiting teams, one of which is focused heavily on big data and data scientists and things like that. So I'm still very much in the trenches trying to find and attract the right people. So if you're a fan of Taken like I am, I just replaced one word in here. It's certainly not as violent as the Taken movie, but I'd like to kick it off by asking you, do you guys know what the most common activity is that anybody performs on LinkedIn is? I think I heard somebody say job search. Profile views, yeah, searching for and finding people. That's the #1 activity that anybody, by the way, not just you guys, but other folks are doing on LinkedIn. And so my question to you is, wouldn't you want to be actually very good at it if that's what everybody else is doing? You always have to ask yourself the question, what are you doing that other people are not? Sometimes the tough answer to that is nothing, which means you have no competitive advantage even if you're using the same resource like LinkedIn. So I also hopefully won't disappoint people, even though the title of this was talking about advanced Boolean search. I actually believe that the most advanced aspect of searching any source of human capital data, and when it comes to professional data, LinkedIn is the #1. They have more data than anybody else professionally. It actually has very little to do with Boolean logic. It has a lot more to do with your mind. So even though we'll cover some Boolean basics today, I'm not really going to go over and, or, and not, and all the other fun stuff syntactically, unless you guys have specific questions about that, which I'd be happy to answer. But this is going to set the stage for the entire talk that I have today, which is you have to learn how to ask the right questions, which when you realize it, the searches that you're running on LinkedIn, they're queries, which are really formal statements of your information needs. You're really asking LinkedIn, do you have these people? But I find that most people don't ask very sophisticated questions of LinkedIn. But LinkedIn is capable of answering sophisticated questions. And the sophistication has nothing to do with Boolean logic. It has to do with everything else you put in your search. So it's all about asking the right questions. So we'll remember that as a theme today. So has anybody seen the movie Inception? Yeah? Even if you have and you're not raising your hand. If you haven't, I would definitely recommend watching it. That, I believe, is Paris. And in this scene, Leonardo DiCaprio is actually watching the city bend. The reason why I have this slide in here is because what you are capable of doing with LinkedIn is actually only limited by your own mind. It has, again, nothing to do with Boolean logic, and actually really nothing to do with LinkedIn. It's your capacity to think creatively and ask the right questions. So I wanted to set the stage for that today. So the first round of questions that I'm going to ask you, and if you're shy and you don't want to yell it out, that's fine. I'll probably answer for you. But can you guys tell me why the average person joins LinkedIn? Does anybody ever wonder about that? What's that? Okay, maybe they're missing out on something. They want to belong to something. Obviously, they're getting a critical mass. Networking, right? Okay. Why do you think I'm asking you this question? Do you guys know? Okay, so this, it might be a slightly epiphanous moment for some of you in the room. It's that if you don't first understand why people are joining LinkedIn, you won't really understand why they may or may not say certain things in their profile. And if they don't say certain things in their profile and you search for it, can you find them? No. So I'm actually the guy that coined that phrase, dark matter. So I'm also a blogger. I have a blog called Boolean Black Belt. I write a lot about information retrieval, searching, recruiting, and things like that. And the concept of dark matter has to do with people that are on LinkedIn that are there, but you can't find because your search excludes them. So when you take the person who joins LinkedIn to network but is not looking for a job, how much information do you think the average person puts in their LinkedIn profile? A lot or a little? It's a little. Sometimes it's very little, and I'll show you a couple of examples of that. So if they're using it for networking, not looking for jobs, they're not filling out their LinkedIn profile like a CV. Many do, but most don't. You have to understand this first, because if you don't first understand that, you will have no clue as to why when you run searches you find people, but you may be completely oblivious to the fact that you might be missing out on 80% of who you could be finding. Now, when it comes to who you can recruit on LinkedIn, this is a really interesting study. They actually did this in, I think, it was 18,000 people in 26 countries of people that were fully employed. And if you look at the percentages, it really technically says that 85% of people should be open to hearing from you. That's how I interpret this. So I could care less that 25% are kind of looking. I think anybody's a candidate. But I just wanted you to take a second and understand that up to 85% of people should be open to your outreach effort, even if they didn't join LinkedIn to look for a job, even if they don't have a CV-level profile. I don't know if we have any audio on that. If not, I'll try to remember what this lady was saying at a LinkedIn event. She's basically she's actually talking to folks at LinkedIn about, hey, I've got software engineers at my company that I try to not only get onto LinkedIn, but also ask them to fill out their profiles. And when she talks to these software engineers, they say, no way am I going to either get on LinkedIn in the first place, or if I am on LinkedIn, I'm not going to fill out my profile. Now, why would they respond that way? Because other people are going to find them and then start recruiting them, which is not such a bad thing, right? It's kind of like being the hottest guy or girl in the room and everybody's hitting on you. If you're a software engineer, if you're on LinkedIn, everybody's hitting on you. It must be so annoying after a period of time, I guess, but it's also a nice thing, I guess, to be wanted, right? So the reason why I try to play that clip is that it shows you that there are people that actually do join LinkedIn, but they on purpose alter their profiles to be difficult for you to find them. If you don't have a tactic or a strategy to approach these individuals, then you probably never find them. And they're doing that on purpose, so you need to be aware of that first. So another really important thing you have to do is first understand how LinkedIn works in the first place. Now, LinkedIn does have some pretty sophisticated things happening behind the scenes, and they won't even tell me all of the interesting reasons why certain people come up. But I've actually done a couple of interesting scenarios where I'll run a search, and then I'll ask other people that I know, specifically ones where I don't have a lot of overlap with their networks, to run the same query, and we largely get the same results. They're not exactly the same, but I'd say probably 80 to 85% of them are the same. So I'm going to ask you right now, why in whatever search I ran, why do you think Simon showed up first? What's that? It's keyword frequency, right? There's a whole bunch of other things going on, but you're never really going to get away from keyword frequency. So now that I've walked you down the step of you have a lot of people that join LinkedIn that are not necessarily looking, right? It doesn't mean you can't recruit them, and there are some people that actually try to make themselves a little bit more difficult to find. Do you think that the average search pulls up most people? It actually pulls up what I would call the tip of the iceberg. So you have to understand that the people that come up at the top are the people that, among many other things that LinkedIn is doing, they happen to typically say the keywords more than the others. However, sometimes the best candidates don't mention the keywords at all, let alone one time. So where do they show up in your search results? So if you can even find them, which we'll talk about, if you find them, they should come up last. And do you guys know what the maximum number of results you guys can review in any single search is? It's 1,000. And some of you guys are probably thinking, I never look past how many? You guys want to throw out a number? 7? Did I hear that right? Was it 7? Some people will tell me 50, right? They'll look at 50 profiles. Okay. So we'll get back to that in a second. So here's another fun thing. This is a real search. I was looking for chief architects, and I actually misspelled the word chief. So I didn't do this just for this conference. I was doing this for real, and I fat-fingered my chief. It was actually for a chief architect. But if you look at, if I've misspelled the word chief, what is the problem and the discovery? There's tens of thousands of people that actually mistype chief. And these are like architects, executives, right? And so we think we think it's funny, but why is it actually, I think it's okay. This is not a CB database. So why could it be okay for someone to misspell something? Well, I'll tell you why I don't care. I know some people are very snobbish about typos and things like that. Yes, in a CB, but if that's why I put that slide up there. Why are some of these people joining LinkedIn? They're not joining LinkedIn to have somebody be really critical about the way that they filled something out. And you might say, hey, it's kind of important to spell your title properly, but they may have spent all of a minute or two creating their minimalist profile, and they really don't care if they mistype something. You might think that's bad. I actually love it, because if you're not searching for common misspellings, then you're missing out on a large portion of what I think is on LinkedIn. And some of them are not even on purpose. Some of them, and I just gave you a couple of them, like, you guys know what MFG would probably stand for? Manufacturing, right? And and I don't just make these things up. I stumble across them, and I keep a little library and that's not even a misspelling. So you have these people who are manufacturing engineers that never say the word manufacturing, they just put MFG. So as soon as you type in manufacturing, you actually exclude the people that are actually in manufacturing, if you follow me. And then you get funny things like you would type out senior, and then you might say, okay, well, another way of saying senior is SR. You may not have probably thought that some people put SNR for senior. And it's almost 100,000 people. That's a lot of people. These are not small numbers. So even though there is some wizardry going on behind the scenes, I think I even used this last year, this is what you need to have as a sudden moment of clarity, that if you're running basic 1 to 2 keyword searches with a title, and you probably know your competitors are running the same searches for the same types of people that you're looking for, you are largely finding the same people they are. What makes me really excited is that in addition to the fact that now you're aware, hey, I'm finding a lot of the same people other people are, what kind of in-mail response rates do you get from those people? Low or high? It's probably low, right? These are the people that are the hottest guys and girls, right? So they get everybody hitting on them, and eventually they just start turning cold on everybody. They get the low response rates. What I want you to understand, though, is if you start thinking outside the box and running some different queries, you might actually get a higher response rate from your emails and find people that literally have never received a message from anyone because they're at the bottom of the pile. And most people always start from top down. These are all things that you probably never really thought about before, and that's why I opened up the presentation saying that advanced search on LinkedIn is less about Boolean. It's actually pretty cerebral. It's a very mental game to try to figure out why are these people on here, what would be or what wouldn't be on their profile, what could be a common misspelling. And this is actually a representation. I wish that I was advanced enough to create one like this for LinkedIn. This is actually produced by NASA. This is actually a 3D representation of dark matter in the universe. And again, I'm no astrophysicist, but there's stuff out there that we know is there, but we can't directly see it. I'm telling you that I would argue, and this might be provocative to some people, I'd argue that up to 2/3 of LinkedIn could be considered dark matter, meaning you run searches that exclude them, but they're qualified for your positions. They're people you would be interested in, but the searches you use terms that they don't use, which means they're excluded. A large portion of LinkedIn. What's interesting is that we're also busy looking at what we can see that we don't think about what we don't see, which again is probably the iceberg analogy is one that's applicable. So just a couple of quick examples. I do a lot of IT examples. I know there's people in here that don't recruit IT. This has nothing to do with what I'm searching for. It has nothing to do with my keywords. It's the thought process behind the technique. So what's going on here is I basically asked LinkedIn a question. And if there's nothing else you get from the session is I want you leaving this room, instead of thinking about writing Boolean queries, you're asking questions of LinkedIn. So in this case, I'm saying, hey LinkedIn, do you have any software engineers or programmers or developers that have that as a current title, but they don't mention any primary development language? That's what I asked. And LinkedIn says, yeah, in the UK alone, I've got over 12,000 of them. Now, this is, I've spoken about this for years because this is an easy example, but for you guys, whatever you recruit, you need to ask a similar question. What could I search for based on title, but exclude the words that I think I should be searching for because they're required skills, now that I know that there's going to be people that don't even mention them? So we're looking at an example of people that work at Google that don't mention a language. Now that's kind of, if you're in IT recruiting, obviously one of the first things you have to look for typically is a language that they're programming in. But look at the list of companies of people that don't mention them on their profile. There's a lot of people that don't mention things that you think they should, and I would call that dark matter, because as soon as I asked a different question and said, LinkedIn, do you have any people that are software engineers that work with Java? These 12,350 people go away. This is what I alluded to before. So some people say that they run a search, and I don't know if they were joking, but you only look through 7 results. Some people say that they'll look up to 200 results if there's 1,000. And if you run really basic keyword searches with a title, and it depends on what you're looking for, I have an example in here later for project managers over finance that returns several thousand people, even in one city. So then the question becomes, well, there's another example of dark matter. If you just retrieved 600 results and you look through 100 results, you've actually not looked at the other 500. And you might be asking, well, Glenn, I don't have a lot of time. I'm busy. I carry a rec load of, I don't know, anywhere from 20 to 30 to 40 recs at a time, if that sounds familiar. The challenge is you now know that you're leaving the majority of people behind that you never look at. I'm going to talk to you a little bit later today about, well, how do you go back and get them? You don't have to do this in one day. If you get 600 results for a particular search, I'm going to get ahead of myself. I would call that talent mapping. Give yourself a few weeks to a few months to eventually exhaust all 600. Do you think your hiring managers would like you to say, hey, I mapped out all 600 people that match your profile? It took me a couple months, but now I know them all? That would probably be pretty valuable. Instead of only looking at LinkedIn in terms of saying, I have a job today, I'm running a search today, I'm looking at 7 to 50 people, and I just discard the rest. Because I would argue, if you discard the rest, how do you even know how to go back and get the ones you just didn't look at? Again, very much a thinking person's game, search is. So what's the whole goal? You guys are using LinkedIn to do what? Big picture. What are you trying to do for your firms? Recruit people, but not just people, right? Best people, right? Best people are a combination of skills and culture, right? You can't figure out a lot of that until you get them on the phone, right? But you do your best to find them initially. So if that's your goal, I would ask you, do you have actually a strategy to find the best people? And if you say that your strategy is to find all of the best people that my organization could want in the different roles that you're responsible for, I would then ask you next, what tactics are you using to ensure that you're going to achieve that goal? And I have yet to encounter anyone, and if you are one of those rare few people, please approach me after this session because I'd like to meet you. And I'm not being sarcastic at all. I really would like to meet you. Most people are thinking, well, we have this nice word track to say, hey, we're trying to find the best people for our organization. You saw that spoken to earlier today on this very stage. But usually when you start asking people, how are you using LinkedIn to do that? Beyond posting jobs, which, by the way, when you post a job, you have no control over who comes in. It's like setting a trap, right? If you set a trap and you're saying, I really want to catch a rabbit, a deer could actually walk into it, or a possum or a skunk. Right? I wanted a rabbit, but you can't control what wanders into your snare. With a search, you can. So now we're going to start talking about your overall strategy to find some of the best people that LinkedIn has to offer, and then I'm going to give you a lot of tactics to do that. So these slides will be available to you after the conference. They're probably actually already online now, so you don't have to take a ton of notes. So what we have here on the left is something that I've actually coined as the 5 levels of talent mining, and I'm not going to go through them one by one, but I'm going to explain several techniques that are going to leverage these through this presentation. And on the right-hand side are, again, other tactics that you can use to accomplish your goal of finding all of the best people that LinkedIn has to offer. And there's also some interesting aspects of the indirect search on number 5, which is using LinkedIn to find people that are not on LinkedIn, thinking outside of the box. So, unfortunately, in Lord of the Rings, which I'm a fan of the series, there is no one search that finds all people. It's impossible, actually, for you to ask one question of LinkedIn and all appropriately qualified people fit are returned. It's impossible. So what we have to do is run multiple searches. So I often hesitate to show examples of searches just because sometimes it gets people thinking too narrowly. But what we're looking for here is a salesperson. The lower left-hand corner is a top producer in sales. The upper right-hand corner would be a substation engineer, as an example. And the bottom is actually, I think, just an interesting way of asking for an analyst, a business analyst, without actually looking for any exact phrases. You could put that in the title field. I call this maximum inclusion because you have to understand that for anything that you're looking for, there's going to be more than one way to say it, typically for their title, for the keywords, and also for the companies. So sometimes there's people that actually say the companies in a way that you would not expect it, and you actually eliminate people that you think you should be finding. But they actually, do you guys know that LinkedIn doesn't force people to use a common set of names for companies? There's some companies that have upwards of 12 ways that I've seen people mention their company. Even companies with one-word names, believe it or not. So maximum inclusion, the whole concept is, well, I don't want to find just some of the people. I don't want to find the easy to find people. I want to find all the people that Glenn is telling me are there. So this takes you down a journey that I call iterative search. So your first search, let's say we're looking for cloud. And even if you're not in IT, it doesn't matter what you're searching for. Take your one concept, give it to LinkedIn, and you could search. It doesn't have to be local. I do this all the time. I say, LinkedIn, show me people who mention cloud. And then I look at profiles. I'm not looking to recruit people. I'm looking to learn. So I look at a profile like this, and we see clouds highlighted everywhere. But again, I'm not trying to recruit. But what I do is I look at all the words that are not highlighted, which most people don't do. Most people are immediately drawn to the highlighted terms. You want confirmation. Yeah, I searched for that. This person's got a lot of cloud. Great. What I'm doing in this case is I'm looking at all the other words that are probably synonymous to cloud that don't say cloud. So can anybody that's up front like yell out one that you see on here? Non-highlighted term that you think is probably related to cloud. Right? So you got that whole parenthetical statement up there, right? Expertise in all cloud taxonomies. This person is like offering it up in a silver platter, just there. What about the stuff at the bottom? This is what your human brains are actually very good at, and it's hard to recreate this with artificial intelligence, by the way. And I evaluate a lot of AI type of solutions to try to do search and match technology. So if anybody tries to do that in their company, I'd also like to chat with you because I have a lot of experience with those companies and some of the good things and some of the bad things. So you get things like OpenStack, CloudStack, Azure, right? EC2, S3. They're all things that are related to cloud that are not saying cloud. So then I take all those terms and then I create a second search. And I'm still not looking for people yet. I'm just using LinkedIn to teach me what the people I'm looking for say on their profiles other than cloud that are related to what I want. Does that make sense? So then I do search number 2. I look at a couple profiles, again, not paying attention to the highlighted words because we're learning the other terms that are on here that were not on the other ones. Like we've got new ones like CloudWatch and SQS. There's all kinds of things in here. And if you weren't aware, all you'd have to do is say, I'm not really sure, Glenn, I don't know this stuff. Half the time, I don't know it either. So I just take the term, go to Google, and confirm or deny that it's related to cloud. And I look at a few more, and I've got a whole bunch of other interesting things that come up. And then eventually I come up with what I call maximum inclusion. So I've got a really large OR statement that's essentially saying, LinkedIn, can you find me people that have cloud experience? And LinkedIn, if it could ask a question, would say, what does cloud experience look like? And that's, I would say, well, this OR statement basically means cloud. And it's going to run it, and it's going to find people, no matter how they say it. Now, granted, if you were paying attention earlier, you might realize, yeah, there's going to be some people with cloud experience that don't say anything about cloud, no matter how you might think they might say it. That's a whole nother ballgame, and I have a couple of examples how you might be able to find them. But it's a simple technique that I find most people don't use. I call it iterative search. It's probably one of the most powerful takeaways that you can go back and do. And it will basically allow you to say, I'm shining a candlelight is my first search, and then I go to like a flashlight is my second search, and then I've got like a flood beam that becomes the third search. I'm actually including more people. I'm getting more specific, yet I'm also getting more people, which is kind of counterintuitive because most people think when you run a longer search, you're going to reduce the number of results. This does the exact opposite. It increases the number of relevant results for people like this. So another thing I've coined is called implicit search. So when you feel like you've bottomed out LinkedIn for people who say the obvious terms that you need, you now have to, now that you know, I've told you, there's going to be people with skills and experience they don't explicitly mention on their profile for whatever reason, whether they forgot to, didn't occur to them, they weren't creating a CV-level profile, or they did it on purpose, because some people do that on purpose. So what I did here locally is I first asked LinkedIn, hey, who has a current job title of an accountant that mentions SAP on their profile? And then what I did is I paid attention to all of the current companies. You know, you can expand them from 5 to 15. And then I took the lists of companies, and I created an OR statement. And then I went back to LinkedIn and said, okay, so now that you've shown me people who say SAP that are currently accountants, I'm now going to go back and say, show me all the accountants that currently work at those companies that do not say SAP. Right? Because I've done some research, and I'm trying to figure out these companies probably use SAP. So now I'm finding accountants, by the way, I think they're local here, 758 locally here that probably have SAP, don't mention SAP, but they work for one of the companies that I just recently searched for people that do say SAP. You guys follow me on that? That's why I call it implicit search. I'm not searching for the skill I'm looking for directly. I'm looking for people that are hinting at, well, I work at a company that probably uses SAP, so if an accountant there, I'm probably using their ERP platform, SAP, whether or not I thought to think of putting it on my profile. That's why it's called implicit search. Most people perform explicit search. They look exactly for the keywords. They're happy finding all the people that say the keywords you expect. Again, tip of the iceberg on LinkedIn. You're really not leveraging the power of the massive amounts of human capital data that LinkedIn has. So a second way, I talk about this every year, the any group feature of LinkedIn is brilliant. So you have to wonder, okay, so if I'm looking for, in this case, I'm looking for a software engineer, how do I find software engineers that probably have Java as a development language, but don't mention Java on their profile? Well, your first question has to be, get rid of all languages. That's not all of them, but I ran a basic search. So that's why I put it in red. So minus sign, parentheses, Java, and a whole bunch of other stuff. But then I'm looking for people who are the types of people I want, at least in the title field. And then I start typing in the groups, because any group will come up. This happens after you run your search, if you're not familiar with it. You can't do it up front. You run your search, then you go to the results page, and on the left-hand rail, you can start typing in things. So what I started typing in was the word Java, and I found all these groups. So if you're looking at that, you're getting close to 1,000 people that are software engineers that don't mention Java, that are in Java groups. Is it 100% likely that all these people are Java developers? No. Is it highly likely that they are? I would argue yes. That's another way to search for people with implied experience. If you search for Java for this, these nearly 1,000 local people, they go away. And they may have done this on purpose, by the way, because they understand how recruiters search. They search for basic keywords. However, I have found that you're going to get usually a good amount of people putting in appropriate titles, because that's the minimum of what you have to put in when you create a profile. So if you're going to create a minimalist profile, I think you still have to put in 3 employers. So you have a title employer, title employer. You don't have to type any words under the description of the positions. So titles can be very powerful if you combine it with what I call strategic exclusion, which is what I'm doing in the upper right-hand corner. I'm on purpose excluding terms that I would normally search for to uncover people that my first search is excluded. So I'm going to show this little video real fast. Some of you may know how to do this. I'll play it a couple of times. You guys see what was happening there? So if you go back a couple statements, and I found that list of companies, what I did, let's see if I can do that again, is I copy and paste it into a straight up and down list, and then I search for $P. So in Word, $P is the carriage return. So every time it goes to new line, I'm telling it to replace the new line with quote, space, capital or, space, quote. And do you see what it does? Does anybody else do this? No? This is how, if you want to create really large or statements of universities that you like to recruit from, large lists of companies. And by the way, LinkedIn, if you haven't seen this kind of stuff before, because some of it's been put on video online from previous Talent Connects, you can put up to 3,000 characters in your search field. So if you wanted to look for several hundred companies at once, you can search for several hundred companies at once in a Boolean or statement. So for anybody who's curious, that's something you probably do have to take a note on, because the video is not going to play in the PowerPoint that's online. So all you have to do is find and replace $P with quote, space, or, space, quote. And all you have to do is then fix the front end and the back end, and now you have a large or statement without having to type it out. You guys hopefully will make some good use of that. All right, so more implicit search real quick. Again, just a couple of examples of how what you can do is search for, actually exclude the most commonly mentioned term and look for other terms that imply the right experience. That's what I've done a couple times. And to show you, sometimes it's only 150 people, sometimes it's 400, sometimes in this case it's for cloud technologies, it's almost 10,000 people, local people, that cannot be found with the most common of search terms for looking for a particular skill. And that just goes back to that meme I used, which was, hey, if I use the same search that everybody else uses, I find the same people. There is no competitive advantage in this. Doing things like this gives you a competitive advantage because you can explore and find people that no one else is finding on LinkedIn. Never assume that it's not possible for you to find people on LinkedIn that other people can't. It's completely possible. And in fact, you want to. That's going to be a part of you developing a competitive advantage. So we're going to have a little bit of fun with that, what I call natural language search. So this is where we look for phrases, and you can use an exact phrase within quotes on LinkedIn, and you just have to start thinking, well, if I was looking for a medical device design professional, what are the types of things that that person might put on their profile? Again, assuming that they're going to have a profile with a bunch of words on it. So we do a couple of phrases here: medical device design, designing medical devices, design medical devices. Now, that's just my first search. I'm going to apply my technique of iterative search after this because I'm going to scan probably, I'll be honest with you, 10 to 15 profiles. And I'm going to be looking for other phrases that like-minded people, like experienced people use. And that's going to become a pretty big or statement of a lot of ways that someone could talk about designing medical devices. And you can see how well it works. I have extensive experience designing medical devices. So I know it's tough in a room like this, but if I were to put in designed with medical devices, it doesn't have to pull up people that have medical device design. It can separate it, because it can say that they designed something else and they have medical device experience somewhere else. What I did is I went a little bit looser in the bottom, what I call natural language search, is that instead of looking for the noun and the verb together, which is really what I did in the upper part, because you notice that this is something I often talk about, is that most people run searches for nouns, but I would argue that your hiring managers don't want to find people that are bags of nouns, right? Nouns are just stuff. Verbs are what people do. And if you start adding verbs to your searches, you'll find that you'll have a higher degree of relevancy, because if someone's going to talk about exactly what they do, what their responsibilities are, it's going to be in a sentence format, and it's a really bad sentence if it doesn't have a noun and a verb. So start adding the verbs of what do they need to be doing. In this case, it's design, prototyping, things like that. So what I did here on the bottom is I separated the nouns from the verbs, and that gets a little loose because you're going to find some examples where it's not so good. But in this case, I wanted to show you a good example. So the sentence is develop, design, prototype, and test new medical device concepts, right? The second sentence talks about filing intellectual property, right? You can see medical devices by itself, but the fact is, I'm trying to find people with sentences in which someone says, I have done this, a responsibility with that, whatever it is I need them to do it with, in this case, designing medical devices. This is something most people don't do. Most people stick to a few basic keywords, a title, and they go. This has a higher degree of relevance because we're finding people that say, I have done exactly what you need me to do, which is essentially what your hiring managers want. Again, not just bags of keywords. A little bit more sophisticated than just a basic search. And this is an example I like to throw up because this person's title is a product development engineer. So anybody that wants to yell loud enough, can anybody tell me what this person does? If you were to try to boil them down to one sentence, what types of products are they developing? I'll help you out. Look at the bottom one, third from the bottom. Okay, functional design team for development and market release of modular pelvic fixation implant. So what do you think that is? What's another word for that? Medical device? What I love about profiles like this is that this person is a medical device development engineer that doesn't say the word medical device anywhere on their profile. It's an example of that dark matter. In fact, I could ask the question, who mentions these products but never mentions the word medical device? These people, there's more of them than you think. And the reason why, and I talk about these things, and sometimes I'm sure people leave and they're like, yeah, that's only a few people. Do you want to know why you might actually doubt this? It's because the searches you're currently running exclude them. And that's why it's like talking about dark matter. That's like, I'm telling you guys, there's millions of people that you're excluding. How would you even know it? Because LinkedIn won't say, hey, here's 400 people, but you missed 1,200. It doesn't tell you that. You have to think first and say, my search found some, but I know I probably excluded some, so how can I go back and refine my searches to start to increasingly shed light on the people that my first searches eliminated? You have to be aware of that. If there's nothing else that I inspire you to do, is just, you have to think quite a bit about, don't be satisfied with your search results because it's a small fraction of what LinkedIn has to offer, especially now that you saw the numbers that they're putting up, across the media. It's 100 million. I guarantee you most searches are only finding the minority, actually. And this is what I hinted at before. And the reason why I put this picture up is that everyone is always searching for the bullseye, the right person. So someone in the audience answered, why do most people join LinkedIn? It's not to look for a job. Somebody over here said social networking. Right? So imagine this for a second. You guys, as recruiters, use LinkedIn for networking. It's a novel concept, right? Instead of looking for people and messaging them and trying to recruit them, what I want you to focus on is when you feel like you've bottomed out the bullseye, the red circle, for all the people that say, I am exactly what you need, I want you to start thinking of the green circle. Who are the people that work with the people that you need? Do you think there's more of them or less of them than your direct target? More? I hope. It is more. So again, I'll stick with an IT example. If I'm a software engineer, who do software engineers work with? QA testers, project managers, business analysts, right? So imagine, if you will, I feel like I've completely pillaged LinkedIn for all of the right software engineers. I can't find any more. I've done all these crazy things Glenn just showed me to do. I found all the easy to find people, and I found all the really hard to find people. I brought them out of the dark matter and into the light, and I feel like I've totally bottomed it out. Well, you're still not done. Because what you could do is find testers. Instead of trying to recruit testers, you could actually reach out to them on LinkedIn, and other methods, by the way, and network with them. I find very few recruiters do that. They would network with other software engineers to find software engineers, whereas I would actually network with the people that work with the software engineers. I hope some of you are finding that to be a novel idea. Most people think so narrow-mindedly, I need a software engineer, I need a project manager. Well, I'll find other project managers and ask them who they know. But there's more people that work with those people that probably would be there would be least resistance for those individuals to provide you with referrals. So think about who the people they've worked with. So if I were to reach out to a tester and find out who are some of the best software engineers you worked with, what's interesting about that is a tester is actually going to be pretty critical of who they refer. So another quote that I love using: if you want to do the impossible on LinkedIn, you have to first see and perceive the invisible. And again, those are the people that you typically exclude. So I want to show you a comparison between somebody that would probably be easy to identify because they have a whole bunch of keywords, right? It wouldn't take a very intelligent person to look at this profile and say, I think I have a pretty good understanding of what this person does. They're an ex-financial controller. In fact, this was a search for a project manager in finance. Well, how about this one? Okay. We know a whole bunch about the lady on the left. It's a lady. But we don't know anything about the guy on the right. The search that pulled up the lady on the left excludes the guy on the right. Do we know anything about this other profile? Does that mean they're bad? These are the things that you exclude because you run searches with too many keywords. I always say go keyword rich first and then go keyword poor second. My point is, most people don't even run searches to be able to pull this person up. That is the totality of that person's profile. How many times do you think someone reaches out to that person on LinkedIn? Very little, if at all. It's like hidden treasure. I love it. Some other interesting things. So you have to think outside the box. I used this one lady, again, from Intel on the left. This is a person who, you see how they put SW everywhere? What do you think that she means by that? It's software. Do you know nowhere on her profile does she spell out the word software? Which is weird. I'm actually assuming she does it on purpose to be avoided by recruiters. But she does still want to use LinkedIn to network with people. So anyone who types the word in software excludes this lady who works for a premier company. On the right, I like to use mechatronics because it's weird and it's out there, and I don't know if anybody does mechatronics recruitment in here. But what's funny is that there's many people that say the word mechatronics, but even if you just look at one extra position on here, you'll say, oh yeah, I maybe shouldn't just search for mechatronics. The other title, mechanical automation engineer, even if you didn't know what mechatronics is, you could learn what mechatronics is just from looking at one profile. So we're talking about mechatronic systems, we're talking about actuators, biomechanics, hydraulics, robotic automation, pneumatic systems, typically automation and manufacturing. You could create a giant string just from this one profile that would be much more inclusive than searching for just the word mechatronics. So you have to start thinking, what does the right talent look like? The right talent doesn't always have all the right keywords or even use the title that you think they should. And sometimes you guys have intake sessions with your hiring managers, and they'll tell you the titles and the keywords, but keep in mind, they're not pros at this. They're going to toss out a few things off the top of their head. You're going to use LinkedIn, that I showed you much earlier today, to ask multiple questions. And you're going to look for the non-highlighted terms that are that are prominent on here and fold them into your search to create maximum inclusion, right? Large or statements of all the different ways that somebody could mention their experience, like biomorphic robotics. So I'm going to tell you a story about this individual. His name is Brett Walker. When I had this assignment, I was actually recruiting for EMC. I think I sat at a table earlier today with a lady from EMC. So I had a position, and they're asking me to find somebody who was a project manager, but they had to have experience overseeing data center moves and consolidations with a particular storage area networking technology, in this case EMC. But if you can look at this profile at the time, there was no mention of EMC on his profile. If I had typed "and EMC," he would have gone away. I would never have found this individual. So I actually got frustrated because I used the word EMC, and I looked at everybody, and I felt like I had bottomed out my potential results. So then I said, and this goes back to the quote, if you ask the right questions, you learn things. I asked myself this question: what would a project manager who probably has EMC experience say on their profile without saying EMC? And I said, well, maybe I'll look for somebody that mentions a thing like data center moves and consolidations, because most data centers have storage, and EMC is a big player. So I'm kind of gambling. I'm rolling the dice. I think if anybody's done data center moves and consolidations, I'd probably say 8 out of 10 people probably have EMC, even if they don't say it. So I excluded the term EMC from my search on purpose, but I searched for people with data center moves, consolidations, migrations, stuff like that. But purposely, and I would call it strategically, excluded EMC. So I came up with Brett Walker from the profile on the left, and I placed him at EMC. And that was a long time ago. And I double-checked, because whenever I use this guy as an example, I'm actually hoping that he never leaves EMC, because you can see he was a pretty good placement, right? He started there in April 2006, and he's been there ever since. And I love this story because it's all from a search for someone who didn't even say the primary skill that was required. And what was really funny is because when I called Brett and I said, you know, I need someone that has experience with EMC, he's a project manager. His response was, well, I don't want to put EMC in my profile. I'm not an engineer. Sometimes people don't put things in their profiles because of things like that. So until you understand the mentality of the people that you're hunting for, the people that you're trying to find, you won't really fully appreciate how many different ways you can find them. So this guy had tons of EMC experience, because I said, okay, Brett, I don't need a hands-on technical person, but you mentioned all these managing data center upgrades, moves, consolidations. Was there EMC involved? He said, yes. I said, are you managing the EMC engineers? He said, yes. I said, that's why we're getting it into your CV, because going to EMC, they want to know you have EMC experience. And he's like, oh. But until then, he purposely left it out because he didn't want recruiters contacting him for hands-on technical positions. I still find that fascinating today. And again, really great hire for an organization in which no one could have directly found him by asking for the required skills directly. So now let's talk about diversity. Is that a concern for anybody, any company in here? There's many different ways you can define diversity. I only have time to show you one, but I want to go back to the whole inception. There is no limitation to what you need to achieve on LinkedIn except your own mind and your ability to conceive of how you would search for it. So I know this has actually been, I think, taped before. It's on YouTube for LinkedIn in the past, but I asked myself this question probably about 3 years ago. Someone said, hey, diversity is important. And they said, well, I need to find female engineers. And I started to ask, well, what would be on a woman's profile that wouldn't be on a man's profile? So the first thing I came up with was her or she. So if you've heard of that, I don't know if somebody else co-invented it, but I was one of the earlier ones to say that. Do you guys know where the words her or she would even show up on someone's profile? Recommendations, right? So that's a nice little fun thing. I still smile when I'm like, yeah, it was an interesting little mental breakthrough. It's not that they would write about themselves, it's that other people would write about them, and you're saying, yeah, that would only be on a woman's profile, not on a man's, right? Unless somebody made a mistake and didn't remember who they were recommending. So in this case, I went beyond that, and I said, well, maybe there's some other terms that I could search for, like women or women's, because they might be like in a women in technology group or something like that. And you run a search, and in the United Kingdom, you know, that pulls up a decent amount of people, but you guys know how many people are just in the UK on LinkedIn? It's over 16 million, so 250,000 is not that impressive. And then I had a little breakthrough moment, and I said, you know, what would definitely be on a woman's profile that would not be on a man's would be a woman's first name. So what I did is I ran a search, And I did this in the US first, so I've got a nice little reveal. I actually spent a lot of time doing this. And I can send you the search for this that's actually more applicable for you, but let me set the stage. So these are the top 477 women's names over 6 decades. So I basically took the top 100 over 6 decades, put them in Excel, one line, used the dedupe function, right? Then put it in Word, used my little trick, snapped it into a giant OR statement. It takes a couple clicks, done, and you run that search, and that pulls up 4.3 million people. So that's not bad. That's actually 67% of the women in the UK on LinkedIn. So two-thirds, right? But because I'm here in the UK and we don't want to just use popular names in the US, this probably took me 30 minutes of research is what I did next. So what I did is I went to, there was no single website. So the United States, it was easy. It was just United States. You would think that United Kingdom would be easy, but it wasn't. I actually had to do England and Wales. I had to do Scotland and then Northern Ireland to put it together. And I deduped it to about 428 of the most common names since 1904, which is much farther back. Granted, I only gained like 200,000 more people, but I did get it up to 69%. So what's funny is that you can take that, put it in the first name field, and then type anything else. So if you're looking for women executives, yeah, does this find them all? Absolutely not. But this is definitely more what I would call maximum inclusion. How would you do it otherwise? I've found no other way to find over 2/3 of the women in most countries other than doing that. So if you're from France, Germany, it doesn't matter what country you're from, all you can do is typically your government website will start publishing things, not all of them, but many of them will publish the most common names, collect it, put it into one big OR statement, and then you can at least take a pretty heroic first stab at finding women. You can do the same thing with ethnic diversity too, by the way. There's lots of different things that you can do. So expats is something that I've actually traveled to Australia a number of times, and when I go to speak at conferences in Australia, one of the first things that they ask me about, specifically with mining and oil and gas, is we keep losing our engineers to other countries, even to the UK. So they would ask me, how do I find people who used to live in Australia that have now moved abroad that we can try to target in the UK and South Africa and other countries, Canada as well, to make them come back to Australia because we keep losing our engineers. And so I know, again, it's right after lunch, so you guys aren't a very lively bunch right now. I'm sure it's all in your heads, so you're not screaming out at me, but what do you think would be on a person's profile that used to live in the UK, or whatever country you're coming from, that is now living somewhere else? Yes, universities, right? And now you might say, well, Glenn, there might be a ton of them. Yeah, it might take you a while to put together a very inclusive university string, but I've searched for well over 100 universities before in a single OR statement. That'll fit in LinkedIn. You can literally create a giant OR statement of 100+ universities and put it in the school. So that would be on something that somebody who at least at some point lived in your country that is now somewhere else. But now you're actually trying to search for people that don't live here anymore that mention those types of things. So what else, other than education, could be on their profile that would tell you that they've probably lived here before or your home country? And this is the thinking part. This is why advanced search, this is why getting more value out of LinkedIn is not so much about Boolean, it's about you thinking of what would these people look like. I'll give you a real quick example. So here what I did is I targeted people who are now in Australia, and I'm looking for people that are in oil and gas. I look for a drilling engineer, and you can see that they actually went to school in London. But this person also talks about experiences where they mention where they worked. So I see UK, I see multiple countries actually. This is the tip of the iceberg. There's many other things that you could find on a profile of somebody who is likely to have been in your home country, and then you have to target them elsewhere to reach out to them to try to bring them back. Does anybody look for expats? A handful of people? I wanted to put that there on purpose because I was told that that would be something of help. But again, it's not about me giving you the answer. It's about me giving you the spark of the notion of what would be on someone's profile of someone who lived in your home country that had moved abroad, targeting them in abroad. Groups are also a good way to find them because there's a lot of people that join local groups. There's even expat groups, by the way, and the any group feature allows you to search for them. And so here's another fun thing too, is that in the first search, if you're trying to look across multiple countries, which I know can be very common in EMEA, is that you can't do it in your first search screen. This may be very basic for some of you, but there's some people this might be an aha for. You cannot do it from the first advanced search interface. But after you run your search, you can simply start typing in countries, and then you want to save the search and say, well, I want to look across these particular countries in Europe, and just save it. And then, of course, languages can be an issue. Does anybody actually use LinkedIn's languages to search in native languages? Some people don't, which is interesting. I'll give you an example where you could do that. In this case, I was looking for accountants in France that use the term, I don't even want to butcher the term because I don't speak French, but I do know that that is the title of an accountant, unless we have a French speaker here that would prove me otherwise. Pretty sure that's accountant. And so we find accountants. Now, these are people that do not have English profiles. So we chose searching it in France. Whoop, I don't want to give it away. What do you think would be on an active job seeker's profile? Because I know that everyone says that LinkedIn is a really good source of passive candidates, and it is, but it can also be a fantastic source of active job seekers. At any time, there's going to be a percentage of people, and if you remember that global study that LinkedIn put out there, it could be anywhere from 12 to 25% of people that either are actively or kind of casually looking. They may be employed, but they want to make a move. They're open to making a move. What do you think someone might put on their profile? Seeking, right? You're going to think of a few, and what you would do is exactly what I did to build this one, which is you can't think of all of them. You don't have to. What you do is you run a search, you look at the profiles, then you look for other terms that are not highlighted that you didn't search for that tell you, hey, I'm looking for new opportunities. In this case, in UK, that pulls up about 1 million people. And here's a really good one. So I don't know if anybody wants this guy. So he's a project manager at HSBC, and he basically says, look, I'm available in mid-December. So if that's of any value to anybody, right? This does pull up some false positives because some people will use these phrases, and they're not saying I'm actively looking right now. But it does a surprisingly good, and that's not even done. If I spent probably 30 more minutes, I could probably double the size of that search and make it more maximally inclusive, including more people. So I always like to tell people, I'm getting low on time, you have to have 2 search tactics. One is to find the text-rich profiles that you're used to finding, and the other one, which most people don't employ, is a text-poor search tactic, which is to strategically exclude the most common terms. And I wanted to just show you, basically the same search pulls 14,349 people just in London for software engineers that mention, .NET Platform, C# or Java. If I exclude that, I get another 9,800. That's a large number of people that are actually excluded from my first search. So just keep in mind, you always have to have a text-rich search tactic, and then you also have to keep in mind there's going to be people with text-poor LinkedIn profiles, and you have to be able to create queries to find them. You're going to have to use what I call strategic exclusion, which is excluding the most common terms. Talent mapping. If you ever run a search like this in a city, and it's a relatively basic search, and basic searches aren't bad, they're just basic. So I'm looking for a project manager with finance, right? Super basic search, but I'm actually pulling up almost 4,000 people. Now, no one's going to look at 4,000 people, let alone the fact that you can't actually look at 4,000 at a time. You can only look at 1,000. But if I wanted to map out all of these people, I could probably do it over a few months. The trick is, this is how I would recommend you do it. And I hope some of you are doing something similar. I call it talent mapping. If I wanted to find all the people with the current title of project manager that mentioned finance or anything more, you look at people, then add them to projects, and then you use this filter to then go back and say, find me people that are not in projects. So you'll eventually whittle away that 4,000 at a time to 0. And you'll never see the same person twice, if that makes sense. It's a really good way to take 1,000 results and chew them up, or over 1,000 and pull them in and say, I've actually mapped out all the people that fit what I'm targeting. So I actually tweeted about this earlier today. This is my killer job that I found online. Somebody that's a software engineer that's fluent in French and English, and I won't even read all the rest of it to you. So you can see there's a whole bunch of required skills, and there's a whole bunch of desired skills. So what I wanted to show you today is most people search for only the required skills, and that's not a bad idea. But sometimes you can still find thousands of people, and you may be happy looking at the first 7 to 50 of them. But some of the best people may not be in the top. And then you might even want to go back to LinkedIn and say, well, why am I not asking LinkedIn if they have the perfect person? And so when you run the basic search, and then you throw in the desired skills, it changes it from 2,540 to 7. So there are actually 7 needles in the haystack or atoms in the hayfield, in this case. So you would start with 7, and you might not say 7's not enough, but at least you then ask the question, LinkedIn, do you have someone that has everything, that explicitly mentions everything? And LinkedIn says, hey, I have 7. And then you might be asking, what do I do next? Well, the next thing you do is you run what I call a search progression. So your first search is for everything. Your second search is for everything minus one of the desired skills. And then you start, that's why you'll see in the red, is I just keep moving around the minus sign or the not operator to strategically exclude different portions of the desired skills. And you would go way past search 5 in this case, because then you're going to start excluding 2 different things out of the desired skills, 3 different things, until your very last search would be just the required skills minus all of the preferred skills. But what I like to point out about this is that you get nice bite-sized chunks of people. And these people were buried in the thousands of results first time around. And again, think of the recruiter that runs a big search and skims off the top, versus think of someone who runs this. It's very probability driven. Why wouldn't you want to see the 7 out of 2,540 that have everything? And then the 21 people that have everything but one of the desired skills. You follow me? And again, this will be in the slides so you can see the logic behind it. So wrapping up, does anybody use the custom fields that are available in LinkedIn Recruiter? No hands? 1, 2, 3, 4. Small percent. So custom fields are brilliant because you can actually not just use their suggested fields, you can create your own custom fields. If you've looked at somebody and you said, I found someone who was a software engineer that didn't say Java, but I know they have Java, you can then use a custom field or you can tag them. There's so many different things you can do that will aid your ability to retrieve them later very precisely. So look into the custom fields. I don't know if anybody will actually get this humor. I won't explain it. So if somebody actually gets this, just approach me after the session. So I'm going to call this Drake-style sourcing. So instead of starting from the top, I'm going to start from the bottom of the search results. So if I got 959 mechanical engineers in a particular location, instead of starting from the top, I could start from the bottom. These people that have very small networks that perhaps no one has ever seen for this particular search. Much higher likelihood of them actually responding to an outreach effort because they're at the bottom, and hardly anybody starts at the bottom. In fact, when I did a similar presentation in the US just a few weeks ago at Talent Connect, someone said, I'm always going to start from the bottom because that will be their competitive advantage. Everybody else is fishing in one small place. I'm going to go somewhere else, uncontested. And then as they join is brilliant. Does anybody use this? It's a really cool way to run a search and then click 1 day ago, because if you can pounce, I feel bad saying it, but if you can pounce on the 8 people who match your profile that just joined 1 day ago, you're probably amongst the first few people that have actually reached out to them. Probably they're a little bit more open to your outreach efforts, and they'll remember you. And before they start getting thick skin and then start trying to change their profile so they can't be found by other people, you'd be one of the first. So these are the major takeaways. I think we're just at about time. Again, you'll be able to see the deck afterwards. These are your takeaways. If you don't have, you might have goals, but you may not have a strategy or tactics to support you meeting those goals. You have to commit to mastery. You have to practice these things. These aren't things to say, hey, those looked interesting, Glenn showed them to me. These are things you have to go back to you and your teams and actually leverage them and get comfortable with them so you can develop your own competitive advantage on LinkedIn and get a lot more value out of your investment. That's where a lot of the real ROI comes from. You can't recruit someone you haven't found. You can't get a referral from someone you haven't found. And I'll close out with this Malcolm Gladwell quote. So this is cognitively demanding. There's nobody who's a natural at this. I'm not a natural at this. When I first got in recruiting, I had no clue what I was doing with regard to this. But I wanted to get good at it because I realized that the more data there is, the more important your ability to retrieve the data is. And if some of us are looking for the same people, you shouldn't be approaching all the same people all the time. Otherwise, you have no competitive advantage. So if some of this feels like it was over your head or you haven't done it before, don't worry about it. There's no naturals. All it takes is practice. And if you commit yourself to it, you can get good at these things and actually get a lot more return on your investment on LinkedIn. So I know we hit time. It's hard for me to see in the back. I don't know if anybody's even going to allow me to have any questions or if they just want to let everybody go. If I could see in the back. Does anybody have any questions for me? No? Did anybody find this interesting at all? There's some things you have takeaways? Yes, 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 yes. We have one hand in the back. Run up to the mic until they pull me off stage.
Thank you for for the presentation. I was just wondering, how about the efficiency? Because when you pull such a big search, when you have like, I don't know, 4,000 of profiles, if there is no keywords to see how relevant are those profiles, how would you leverage the time you spend to find the best person against actually, searching or going through all of those profiles?
A couple of things that I would say is that you could target companies, right, that produce good people. You saw some of the names of the people that came up with the minimalist profiles. The first thing I would do is roll my dice on companies. So if they work for a reputable company that other people have already joined your company from, I would probably start there. So even though I might be excluding a lot of the keywords that I've already used, because I'm assuming that you've already found all the easy to find people, then we have to go back and find the ones that are not so easy to find. And I would probably rely on universities and companies first, then perhaps recommendations, because there's some people with very minimal profiles that are recommended by other folks. So I'd base a little bit on the reputation. But again, you'd be surprised at some of the very big, well-reputable companies that have people with like that HSBC project manager that have no information. And you might say, well, how do I know? How do you know that somebody that has a really well filled out profile is actually good? Yeah. That's the problem. We assume because it's there that we know. The reality is some of the worst people have the best filled out profiles. Does anybody run into that? Yeah. They're very keyword loaded. They want to be found. They're very desperate, right? They're all dressed up properly, and you have to wonder, why are they trying to be found so much? Maybe there's a reason there. There's not always, but I'm just saying there's always the converse to the argument too. Yeah. But once you're done with the people that are highly likely based on the keywords, you start going into the ones that have, you could say there's less of a likelihood, but at least you know you're dipping into a talent pool that you've excluded before and that your competitors aren't fishing in. And I would just systematically over time start to explore that. And you'll probably hit some bad folks, but I would guarantee you from my own experience, you're going to hit some gems that you're like, I can't believe I never did this before.
Fantastic, thank you.
Yep,
and how long did it take you to develop all of these strategies?
I'll be very honest, it's a good question. I'm getting pulled off the stage, but I will tell you, my first year. So a lot of these techniques are just data-based. It's not about LinkedIn. You can do this anywhere else where there's human capital data, Stack Overflow, GitHub, Twitter, Facebook, doesn't matter. Within my first year, I would say. I've refined things over time, but most of what I learned in my first year. So it doesn't take 10 years to master things, or 10,000 hours like Malcolm Gladwell claims.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I appreciate everyone's time.